Welcome to Men's Anonymous, the podcast where men can be vulnerable and open without fear of judgment. Your host, Daniel Weinberg, leads authentic and unfiltered discussions that explore the challenges and triumphs of modern manhood. Join us as we break down barriers, challenge stereotypes, and redefine masculinity. Men's Anonymous, a safe space for men to lower their shields and share their inner world without judgment.
On today's show, we have a conversation with Bodhi Aldridge. We go deep on what it means to be doing the work and coming into your masculine and feminine energy. Here's my conversation with Bodhi Aldridge. Bodhi, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm well over here in Oz, mate. The weather's good, surf's good, life's good.
Where are you exactly?
Just north of Byron Bay.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, nice part of the world.
Very nice. So let's jump in. You've had a very colorful life. You had a career as a lawyer for quite some time, and then you did a big switch, big transition. Do you want to walk us through that whole process and what brought you to where you are today?
Yeah. So, one of the maps I teach and use is my interpretation of the hero's journey. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure, on the podcast and the way I've filtered the contemporary hero's journey, because a lot of the listeners would be familiar with the phrase, and the heroine's journey is slightly different.
Why don't you explain firstly, what is it when you say the hero's journey? Why don't you explain to us what you mean by the hero's journey?
Sure, happily. So I guess the seminal work in this space was Joseph Campbell, The Power of Myth. He did a series on the hero's journey, and he was an anthropologist and an American anthropologist, and traveled the world and started to look at traditional cultures around the world, whether it's Hindu culture, Aboriginal culture here in Australia, Papua New Guinea, South Sea Islanders, South America. And what he found was that all of the cultures in their myth and their story map this journey he called the hero's journey. And if we go back to Anglo culture, we go back to European culture, Celtic culture, they all had this journey. And essentially there are different aspects of the journey. But what it means, and Carl Jung did a lot of work in this space as well, if you think about your individual journey and your individual consciousness, most people accept that we're also informed by a collective consciousness, by an archetypal journey, a mythology, and certainly traditional cultures did. And so what Joseph Campbell did was mapped the different stages, this archetypal journey, this mythical journey that we're all on as men. And I invite any of the guests who want to map their journey, you'll start to see some of the different milestones. And early on, and what I did was I put the Ken Wilber work over this. So the Ken Wilber work, which is incredible work, the integral work, where he mapped stages of consciousness and consciousness development. And again, any of the listeners who want to dive in, I'm no brainiac like these guys. These guys hold incredible concepts. But the easy map, and again, the hero's journey, Joseph Campbell uses slightly different language, but the easy map I use, and this has certainly been my own journey, and none of it's linear, although the masculine wants it to be linear, it's more a spiral. So there's the wake up, there's the clean up, there's the grow up, there's the show up, and there's the open up. And
why don't you just give us a little two-liner on what each of those are? What's the wake up?
Fantastic. The wake up, and tying it back to my story as you invited, is so if you think about it, so in Celtic mythology, there's a beautiful hero's journey myth. And what they say is that men are closest to the Holy Grail, which is the search of the hero, King Arthur's tale, all of that, at 16 and at 45. And so what happens is, and any of the listeners, and reflect for yourself, Daniel, Normally, as teenagers, for a lot of us, we have what the psychologists would call the existential crisis. What's this all about? We have a sense of maybe there's something spiritual out there. What's the purpose? What's the meaning?
Is
And
this, would you say that when people refer to men going through a midlife crisis, they're really referring to the wake up?
exactly, 45 in mythology. Yep. So some as teenagers and some of your listeners had that taste. A lot of us had that taste, but in Joseph Campbell's language, we hear the call and we resist it. So a lot of us at 16 kind of went, maybe there's something. Before we know it, finish school, apprenticeship, university, marriage, kids, bang, we're gone.
Yep.
Yeah. So we may have heard the wake up call, but resisted it.
Or we just slotted ourselves into the program.
Exactly. And then absolutely the midlife crisis, fascinating, it's often around the mid 40s. Yeah. Is exactly because in mythology, you're closest to the grail. Now, the grail essentially starts with the wake up to realize that you're more than your pinhead. You're more than your ego self. You're more than your thinking mind. You know, we've been conditioned that the thinking is everything. Yeah. 60,000 thoughts a day, most of them are negative. Yep.
60,000 a day on average.
Yep. Yep. And most of them are negative. And this is the subconscious mind, the thinking mind.
Tim refers to that as the itty bitty shitty committee.
Yeah, that's right. A simple way, certainly in traditional cultures, is that there's your false self and there's your true self. Now, there's a healthy ego and an unhealthy ego. So a healthy ego is a sense of self, a sense of boundaries, a sense of agency, you know, the paradox of separateness and oneness. Yeah. But the unhealthy ego, the false self, is all of the fearful thinking. It's all the not good enough. It's all the masks. You know, again, the midlife crisis this is where men have spent 20, 30 years gathering their career, gathering their possessions, gathering their persona, thinking this is what is going to make me happy. This is success, only to realize that that's a false journey.
Well, that pursuit, that career pursuit, becomes their identity. You know, it's what they attach their identity to. It's like, you know, I've been building this business, or I'm doing this project, or it's very mission focused, you know, and that becomes their identity.
Yeah, and that's what we've been sold, you know. And again, it's not that you don't pursue your career, look after your family, provide, but exactly as you said, Daniel, when your identity is caught up in that, you're identifying with a limited self, not your true self. And one of the common ways that we wake up is through nature. Yeah. Remember, change comes through inspiration or desperation. So unfortunately, some people go through the dark night of the soul, you know, the midlife crisis, the health issue, the relationship issue. Out of that, bit of a mirror going on. Yep, that's right. And so that's the desperation where you go, you're brought to your knees.
You actually, where you it's a baptism of fire. You actually don't have a choice.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Your spirit, your soul, your essence, whatever you want to call it, is going, no. You know, that beautiful work of A.A. Almas. We'll put all these in the show notes. You know, he's an incredible Jewish philosopher. And his beautiful, beautiful quote about
What's
there's
his
a
name?
part of you.
Can you repeat the name again?
A.A. Almas, Almas, I think. Written some incredible work. He says there's a part of you that loves you more, than that limited part of you. And that's going to keep tapping on you until you hear the message. Yeah. And again, often it comes from desperation. It comes from those challenges. And, you know, if you're open to it, Daniel, you know, maybe you could reflect a little bit about your journey, but the hero's journey is often that's the wake up call.
Yeah.
But then you got to do the cleanup.
Yeah.
The cleanup is you got
work.
Yeah, the work, the shadow work, the inner child work, the emotional maturity work, all of that. Yeah. And so going back to your question, there's a wake up, inspiration. Those listening to the podcast, please be inspired. You're more than your thinking mind. You're more than the identity you may have. And then there's the cleanup. And the cleanup typically is what in psychology, in psychotherapy, is very much, the shadow work, the inner child work, as I've said. It's, and there's some beautiful, beautiful modalities out there, but, internal family systems now, so many different modalities, and they're all good. It's like just any of the listeners who want to lean into a bit of cleanup, I got to face a little bit of my childhood stuff or my, like just find a teacher that suits you. It's one part of the puzzle. It's not the puzzle in itself, but it's an important part of the puzzle. Yeah, you got to do a little bit of cleaning up. As who was it? The beautiful Mickey Singer, who wrote the Surrender Experiment and the Untethered Soul. And again, if any
Michael Singer,
Michael Singer, Mickey Singer, yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Untethered Soul.
Yeah.
I reckon I said it in my introduction trailer to the podcast. Michael Singer, Untethered Soul. I think in 2022, I read it approximately 30 times, just on repeat.
Yeah.
I just like a very close friend of mine gave it to me and said, "You need to read this. You need to get the mind stop playing tricks on you, overthinking. Got to stop the chatter, And it's actually a brilliant book.
Brilliant book. And I love, one of his sayings is, he said, it's like you're living in a house, and the house is you, your body, your life. Yep. And you keep ordering takeaway pizza and you never get rid of the pizza boxes.
Mm-hmm.
And your house is just a mess. The internal aspects of your house is just full of pizza boxes, full of stuff. And he said, unless you clean up in a house, you're never going to experience externally whatever you're looking for. And again, it's like, another analogy is like we grow up and we put on this backpack of all the stuff, all the stuff that and if you don't look at your backpack and start unpacking it, you're just going to drag it to your deathbed.
Well, you just take it everywhere you go. Everywhere you go, it comes with you.
Exactly. And we want to make it about somebody else and, the victim energy, the pity party. Which leads to the next piece, yeah. And again, this isn't linear. This is, basically a spiral. And so once you start doing the cleanup, you start to look at the grow up. And, you mentioned pre-recording, I've done lots of rites of passage work with young men, traditional cultures, with my sons. So in traditional culture, they knew that unless you're initiated into manhood, you don't grow up.
That's right.
Yeah, and you've got to go through those, So in Aboriginal culture here in Australia, it was a big ceremony where the boys, when they met puberty, there was a ceremony where they were stolen, inverted commas, from the mothers, and the mothers knew it was happening, and they'd wail and cry, and oh, my little boy, and they'd be taken to the desert for 30 days with the men, and they'd be initiated. Because the journey of initiation is little boy to big boy. Yep. So 7 to puberty is big boy. And then puberty to sort of 18 is young man. What is it to be a young man? What is it to grow up? Yeah. And as I say to my parents that I coach, the dance with teenagers, the contextual tension is between freedom and responsibility. So the teenager wants more freedom. Yet what does responsibility look like? And this isn't draconian authoritarian responsibility. It's just growing up. And then obviously moving into adult was another initiation. And I work with a lot of men, and I work with a lot of couples where the guys haven't grown up. They're still leaving the friggin' wet towels on the fucking bathroom floor. And again, if we look at it from psychology, and this is one of the latter parts of the hero's journey, the 2 biggest issues, and any of the listeners who are married, recently married, any of the couples that are listening, please. So what happens for most men, and I'm talking to predominantly Western men, early 30s to 50s, possibly some of the younger ones. And there are 5 stages of the feminine that men have to initiate themselves into. But the first one, there are 2 aspects of our relationship with our mother. And so what happens is that some men, Yeah. And you would have heard of the mother complex,
Yep.
the Jungian work. So some men never get under the shadow of their mother, never get
never?
out of the shadow of their
Oh,
mother.
get
They
out of the shadow.
constantly, they never grow up. They never lean into life, as a terrible stereotype, at 35, they're sitting in the back room playing computer games, still getting fed by mum every night because the mother complex was too strong. There was no other. There was no othering. There was only mothering. There was no
Mm.
ability to separate themselves and make a life for themselves. And again, it's not critical of any mothers out there. It's just a symptom that we see. The other interesting one
But on
is that,
just on that, is there something that that mothers should also be aware that this is
yeah,
a duality, right? So that there must be some tools that mothers can use to ensure that they also, don't create that situation.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And thank you for asking. So if we look at rites of passage, and we look at the teenage years, what happens is that teenage girls push away from father, teenage boys push away from mother.
Push
And a
away.
lot of them push away energetically. I'm a man now, I'm a boy, I need my privacy, I need discover myself, my peer group becomes my biggest influence. I want to be, I don't want to listen to mum anymore. But some mothers get fearful and hang on and don't give their teenage boys space. They're fearful they're going to get in trouble. They're fearful they're not going to come back. It's the mother's agenda, not the child's agenda.
Mm.
Yeah. And when we talk about parenting, collaborative parenting is about thinking about the child and the adult.
And you're
Yeah,
saying with girls, it's the other way. It's the girls pushing the father
absolutely.
away, not the father
You've,
pushing the.
exactly. You've got daughters. You've probably, I know, you
I've got
travel
3
to see.
daughters and 2 sons.
Exactly. One of the biggest challenges, and I've got 2 daughters, I've got 7 granddaughters, yeah, is the daughters at puberty have to push away from dad. Yeah, because they got to develop their femininity. They got to develop a sense of self. Again, the peer group becomes the big influence. It's not that they're doing it intentionally because they don't like you, but they're discovering themselves. Again, they're creating a sense of other. And the key with the divine masculine is to hold the space for your daughters. They will come back. Yeah. And you are the representation of a divine masculine until they move into the next chapter of their life. And same for mothers with their son. Does that make sense as far as the mother? And you've been there with your daughters. I'm sure you've been through it or are going through it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, again, one of the things I teach is embodied presence, working with the energy of the masculine and feminine. Because if you don't know how to ground your masculine energy as a father, as a lover, as a husband, yeah, you're just going to cloud the waters. Yeah,
So let's this is a good segue. Let's talk about the masculine and the feminine energy, because men, unbeknownst to a lot of men have both. Okay.
Yep.
And then the topic of polarity between
Yep.
masculine and female energy and how important that is for relationships, etc.
Yeah, beautiful. And the last 2 of the just to complete that loop, the show up is when a man's on purpose. Yeah. So you grow up and then you show up. And a man who's not on purpose is like a boat without a rudder. If you're not clear on your purpose, if you're not clear on articulating your purpose, go and do the work. Yeah. And your purpose, there's purpose within purpose within purpose. The great work of David Data, which has informed so many of us, even leading
Way
to
of
the
the Superior
polarity.
Man.
I'm going to beautiful body of work, which still informs so many of us, including myself. And we'll talk about that
Absolutely.
in the polarity. And then the final is the open up. And this is when men have to initiate into their feminine. This is the part of the hero's journey that's often missed. A lot of the men's work, great men's work I mentioned to you, I'm going to the US to talk into the men's movement there with all the other leaders in this incredible work. What happened is we leaned into the warrior energy, which is so important. Yeah. And that's very much the showing up, a healthy warrior.
Warrior, not meaning someone who worries, but a warrior.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then the final loop is integrating into into the divine feminine, which we may come back to in a minute if you want me to answer the polarity question first. I just wanted to close that.
And with this journey, would you say, I've got this theory with men, which
Yep.
is men are like fine wines. They just take a long time to mature, right? So when you describe and to get good, right? So when you describe this journey with the typical midlife crisis happening at 45 and you describe this hero's journey, are you suggesting that men's journeys really happen more into their 50s going to their 60s than mid-20s, 30s? It takes men that long to get to where they need to get to.
Well,
Is that
I
what
hope
you're
not.
saying?
I hope not.
No, but from what you see, you work with a lot of different men. You work with a lot of different leaders from the biggest companies we're all familiar with, the Teslas, the Googles, the Amazon. You work with the whole array of them. So what I'm asking, given that your experience, is that what you observe?
I would say it a fair generalization. Yep, definitely. I feel, and this is the beauty of your podcast and the work so many men are doing, and some of the men listening to that, is I feel part of it, Daniel, is because they haven't been exposed
Agreed.
to these conversations. So
Agreed.
I think they may have done it earlier if they had the mentors, the teachers, the podcast, the book, the courses and the programs. Yet, with what you were saying, I would say as a generalization, a lot of men by that age have pursued a level of success and realized that wasn't it. That wasn't the Holy Grail.
That's right.
And then are starting to really put the mirror up and go, I got to kind of look at myself here. It can't be about everybody else.
But so it does then take one needs to have some life experience to actually start that process. Otherwise it becomes quite, I know from my own perspective, if I wouldn't have gone through the things that I went through, I wouldn't be able to be where I am now. It just wouldn't be possible, because otherwise it becomes academic. It becomes theoretical. And I think to get to, where you can get to, you need to be able to truly feel it in your gut. You need to, you really need to physically and mentally experience it before, you can really apply all these things. Otherwise, and I think that's why maybe it takes longer for men than it does for women. Women are a lot better at talking, opening up about things, making themselves vulnerable, really understanding themselves, where men suppress it. You talk about the young, the young child, the inner child. Most men will suppress that and will not be aware or acknowledge or realize that inner child is still within them until a much later date, if any.
The question I wonder, though, in your statement is, do you feel, and the side note is, so, and this is interesting for any of the parents, is every human being on the planet, from child to teenager to adult, will face the dark night of the soul, will face the demon. And that can happen as a teenager, it can happen in your 20s, it can happen in your 40s. And so the only caveat I'd add to your comment is, and I certainly know with my 4 adult children, what they went through as teenagers, boy, oh boy, incredible courage, incredible commitment, and they had good guides. What I say to any parent is, you have an education fund and you have a therapy fund. And every one of your children is going to go to therapy, and most of it's about you. So don't think they're going to escape it.
Mostly it's about the parent, you're saying.
Exactly. It's always going to be about the family of origin. So don't think you can Pollyanna your children. Don't think you're going to get it. I'm not saying don't have good intentions, but it's the human experience. I cannot know joy unless I've known pain. I cannot know happiness unless I know sadness. But if you
Yes.
can create a container that it's okay to feel sad, it's okay to move into your pain and get the support around them, other men,
Mm, mm,
therapists, peer groups. That beautiful saying, the most important men in your life, are your closest peer group friends, and your mentor. And so if you're in your 20s and 30s and haven't got a mentor,
mm,
find one.
mm.
Find one that has the qualities that you look to in a man, the leadership qualities, the relational understanding, the feminine. And again, the Luke Skywalker, all the hero's journey, one of the key parts is you find the mentor, you find the sage, you find the person that gives you that.
Yeah, very
I
true.
know we went off track. What was the specifics? Was it about, do you find wine? Do you think? I think I've answered that a little bit. I think good or bad, and again, because you think about your exposure to this work at 20 or 30, you've found it obviously later in life.
That's
And
right.
definitely the men I work with, when I walk into a boardroom, yeah, what I know is this, Daniel, is it's not that men don't want to be vulnerable. They just have to feel safe to be vulnerable.
Right.
I can walk into a boardroom of 12 powerful leaders and create a safe space of vulnerability. They'll go there.
Okay.
Yeah. And there's a craving. I think collectively there's
Oh,
even deeper craving at the moment.
that I'm feeling now. Maybe it's
Yeah.
just because I've been getting deeper into this, but
Yeah.
yeah, you can see that it's it's much needed. And you're seeing, well, maybe it's also because of the age. I'm 50. So, it's around that time where you're talking about where they're
Yeah.
having waking up, and it's at a point where you're like, okay, you've been on the journey for a while. There's a bit of it's a pause to reflect, and
Yeah.
is this what it's all about? Like, I've been working this hard to get here and I'm not that happy, or I'm facing divorce, and how did that happen? And I get a lot of, it's not fair, I don't
Yeah.
deserve this. There's a lot of self-pity and blaming. So it's quite a process.
Yeah. And again, if you think about the growing up and showing up, it's like you're the author of your life. You create the whole of your own reality. Yeah. And anytime you challenge that, you've gone into victim, you've gone into rescue, you've gone into the drama triangle, you're out of effect. And again, any of the listeners, find a teacher, find a book, find a podcast, find
Absolutely.
somewhere where you can learn how to be the author of the whole of your reality.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's right.
because and again, the pinhead, the logical mind will challenge it. But your essence, there's a part of you that knows there's a bigger game.
Yeah, definitely. Let's switch to the male and female energy for men, and the polarity that's required in relationships, etc. I assume.
Yeah, and you mentioned it, and one of the key distinctions is this isn't about gender. And so, we'll talk more about that, because and this is one of the reasons this language is resisted a little bit, because we talk about the masculine and feminine energy and people automatically go to gender. Yeah. And if I pulled the David Data thread, which was such a useful thread for me, and he described it through his teachers and teachings, if we think about polarity, so if we think about the universe and we think about Mother Earth, there is this polarity exists, this energetic polarity, the north and south pole, the polarity, the magnetism of that polarity. Now, we know this through science, and traditional cultures knew this, and traditional cultures realized that these energies, this polarity, and they just decided to give it a name. Yeah. And, it's yin and yang in the Tao. It's the masculine and feminine. It's Shakti, Shiva, and the many forms of that in the Hindu philosophy. Because what they knew is that this current is running through the universe, it's running through nature, and it's running through us. So the feminine energy, the Shakti energy, is everything that flows and everything that moves. Yeah, it's like the ocean. It can be wild, it can be calm, it can be stormy. Yeah, and the driver of the feminine energy is connection and love, connection and love, connection and love. In each moment, it's looking for connection and love. Yeah, and the masculine energy is that which presences the feminine. So it's the mountain, yep, that presence is the ocean. It's the river is the feminine, and the riverbanks is the masculine. And it's in us. And I'll come back to relationships. Most men are more in their masculine as a generalization. Again, it's not based on gender. We've got lots of, nuances now around gender fluidity. Yet most men are more in their masculine energy, and most women are more in their feminine. Huge generalization, yet, feel into it, any of the listeners. And one of the things is that if I talk about the women in their feminine, when I work with female leaders, we haven't been taught the distinction between your feminine energy and the masculine and feminine traits. So we've got this polarity, this energy that runs through, but we've also got these traits. So the feminine traits are very much about connection, collaboration, complexity, nurturing, caring. Now they're in men and women. The masculine traits are very much about strategy, about logic, about linear thinking, literal thinking. And they're in men and women as well. Yet what happened for a lot of women in the workplace, they thought they had to become more masculine to succeed. So they had these masculine traits, but they lost touch with their feminine energy, with their life force. And the biggest journey for the feminine is from depletion to replenishment. The biggest symptom for working women over 40 is adrenal fatigue. They're exhausted. Because they've disconnected from their feminine life force. They think they've got to be more masculine. Masculine traits. Often, a lot of them obviously are holding the caregiver role in the family, children, and things like that. And, for men, it's mental illness, anxiety, depression. For women, it's adrenal fatigue. Again, huge generalization. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the studies are there.
Adrenal fatigue, which leads to just being tired all the time.
Absolutely. And then, perimenopausal, menopausal brings its own challenges, but it's just exhaustion. And when I work with companies, when I work with boardrooms with men and women, when I work with women in organizations, they're just exhausted. And they're exhausted also by the lack of awareness of the masculine in the organization, which again is another, I run workshops around the masculine energy and feminine energy in businesses. And most of the middle-aged white guys, their eyes are like, dinner plates, because they've never heard this stuff. They don't realize how ignorant they are as to what's going on in the feminine. They're losing 50% of the energy in the workplace, not just the women in their feminine, but their own feminine. And so we've got these polarities. And for men, again, a man can be in his masculine energy and access his feminine traits. When you're with your daughters, you're caring, you're connected. Yeah. But when it comes to relationship, and I work a lot with couples in relationship. Yeah. And what happens is the polarity, of the masculine and feminine is the attraction.
Sure.
The eros that occurs when you're more in your masculine, you're attracted to the feminine, vice versa.
Yep.
But unless you know the practices and teachings to stay in your masculine, and your beloved can stay in her feminine, long-term relationships, I've been with my wife 45 years, long-term relationships.
You're like the unicorn.
Well, yeah, that's why I want to teach this stuff, because I see couples and they just become friends. They become companions. They lose the juice. They lose the spark. The woman's getting tired. Yeah, exactly. And brother and sister that now want to argue instead of juicy, healthy, masculine polarity. How does this look? How do we keep it? And I believe it's one of the greatest gifts we can give the world at the moment. Relationship and healthy couples, who navigate this journey and keep the juice, keep the polarity. And it's also keeping the polarity in yourself. You got to understand your masculine and feminine. Like, I'm more in my masculine, but I'm aware of my feminine energy. And I connect to my feminine energy, whether I'm with my daughters, my granddaughters. One of the beautiful examples, I do a lot of work, as you know, with groups of men online.
Yep.
And my demographic is guys, married, mortgage, business, kids.
I want you to talk us through how these groups work and why you're getting these men now.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things I say to my guys in that demographic, and I think it applies to any man who's more in their masculine, yep, buying a present. So have you ever bought a present for one of your wives?
One of my wives. Yes, I did. Not anymore.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah,
And
yes.
have this joke about man shopping and feminine shopping. So most men in their masculine, generally when they shop, but certainly when it comes to a beautiful gift for their beloved, it's all about, I use the analogy, the masculine energy is like killing a kangaroo. Yeah, we know where it is. We're linear. We're strategic. We've got our spear. Yeah, and I'm going in to kill a kangaroo. Yeah, I'm going to the grocery store to get these 5 items. I'm getting in. I'm getting out. Yeah. You look at the feminine in the grocery store. It's all about the journey. It's all about flow. It's all about connection and talking. Oh, look at this. This is beautiful. And the girl that's serving them, how's your day today? And it's such a beautiful journey. And the guys are getting frustrated. They're holding the shopping cart, getting so annoyed because they just don't have awareness. Now, when it comes to buying your beloved a present, and I'll invite you to do this next time you can, Daniel, and in fact, I think one of your previous podcast hosts, who's a client of mine, had this experience and had such a different experience. So when you learn how to access your feminine energy and realize it's all about flow, it's all about heart, it's all about the journey, it's all about beauty. So invite any of the listeners, next time you're buying your beloved something. In fact, this was a recent Christmas present one of the clients did. Just find a store where there's possibly going to be something she'll enjoy, whether it's jewelry, crystals, soaps, and
Whatever.
just go into your feminine energy, open your heart, follow the energy, notice what attracts you, notice the colors, notice the smells, notice the beauty. Don't be focused on the outcome. Don't be focused on the time. Don't be focused on the price. And he said it was transformational. He said he bought his wife something very simple, very heart-centered, and she said it was the most beautiful gift she'd ever received from him. And he said up until then, he was last minute, rush, got to get a present, bloody hell, so that polarity in us is just as important. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. There's a challenge for you.
You're right. We're very mission focused. So like we are in life with career, it's the same thing. It's like I don't want to waste any time here. I've got to get her a piece of jewelry, or I've got to get her a bag or whatever. And it's like, boom. Yeah, it can be seen as a task.
Yeah,
that you have to complete.
Exactly. And often men, particularly in the hyper masculine, that's how you've lived your life. Where have I got to get to? How do I get there? I'm in a hurry. When I do retreats, and as you know, I'm doing a retreat shortly in the UK. I'm not sure when this is going to air, but one of the things we do is a receptive walk. So the feminine energy is all about receptivity. Yeah, the masculine energy, it's the electromagnetic current. The masculine is the outward energy, the feminine is the inward energy, the head and the heart. Take the men on a receptive walk in the forest. Just, 20-minute walk, get them into their feminine, and just say, I just want you to walk slowly and notice in silence. Transformational. Some people, a colleague of ours who who has a beautiful retreat center, he said, I've walked this 1,000 times and I've never seen and felt this path that way because I'm always getting somewhere.
So you're saying that how what's the category of men that you get? You get, what is it, mortgage?
Yeah.
To say
Yeah. I mean, for me, and again, if I think about my hero's journey, in Hindu philosophy, they say you're born into a certain dharma. Yeah. And some people are born to be monks or priests. Some people are born to be exceptional musicians, or in our culture, athletic and things like that. And some people are born to be what they call householders. And householders is about getting a worthy profession, trade, getting married, having children, providing for your family, living in a cultural, suburban lifestyle. And so I typically work with, I would call householders. So they're married, normally early 40s to late 50s, mid 50s. They've got a mortgage usually. Some of them have got past that, but you remember the days when you had a mortgage. Yep. Often they have a business or a leadership role. So, they're not, as you and I, they're not doing Burning Man with the fisherman's pants and the man bun. That's a different model. That's more the
Not
artistic,
yet.
creative.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Exactly.
Have you done that,
And
by the way?
yeah. But it's good for fun, but it's not my client base. There's
Right.
plenty of great workshops out there. I want to work with the men who are married, mortgage, business, kids,
Okay.
because I want them to realize that even with that commitment, and I talk a lot about commitment, I know one of your previous guests talked a lot about commitment. If you're committed to that, it's the most worthy journey is to lean into that. And, one of my clients talks at practical spirituality. He says, Bodhi, I still have a barbecue on the afternoon Sunday afternoon with my mates, but I know that I'm a spiritual being at some level having a human experience. I'm not, I don't go to church or anything, but he said, I just know there's more to me. But I don't have to leave my family. I don't have to leave my business. I don't have to leave my friendship crew necessarily. But I've just got a deeper connection with myself, with my beloved, with my children, my friends, and my community. And again, that's such a big part of the hero's journey and the wheel of life in Hindu philosophy. And so, I work a lot with those men. And what I'm finding, to your comment earlier, is also a lot of men now, typically sort of late 40s, early 50s, who are, and I work a lot globally. I work a lot in the UK, as you know. And so many of those guys now are, they've worked hard. They've provided for their family. The children are getting on with their lives. And they're kind of exiting, in the old days, you'd call it retiring.
Mm.
And one of my biggest bugbears, and any of the listeners out there, one of the things I want to do, Daniel, is a golf club tour to grab all those middle-aged white men and say, you cannot spend the rest of your life playing golf. You're the most entitled, privileged, influential people on the planet with so much wisdom. I will not let you play golf and talk shit for the next 30 years. It's not allowed. You've got to do something
Not healthy?
constructive. It's
Not healthy?
totally unhealthy. But you think about exactly where we started around role models and rites of passage and making a difference. So many of those men, they don't realize how entitled they've been, how privileged they are. And to sit around playing golf and talking shit, it's like, no, you've got to give back.
What would you like to see? I've got a lot of people I don't play golf. I've got a lot of people in my universe that play golf a lot. What would be your message to these men in terms of what would you suggest they do to replace their time playing golf?
Do the work on themselves. Exactly what we've just said. Most of those guys have never really looked in the mirror. They're still running the avoidance model. They're still thinking, if I avoid enough, talk enough shit, play enough golf, drink enough wine, I'm going to get through to 80 and go, that was a good life. Now, these are huge generalizations and intended to be provocative.
Can't you have both? Can't you have golf and spirituality together?
Exactly. That's the point. It's not about not doing golf. It's not about not surfing, whatever your pursuits are. But what I find is so many of them are shut down and afraid to do the work. They're living from the neck up, and I just want to provoke them because there's so much beauty. My mantra, Daniel, is, to ignite the inherent magnificence in men. That's my mantra. There are say
that one more time. That's beautiful. Say that one more time.
Yeah. To ignite
the
inherent magnificence in men. These men are beautiful men. They have magnificence in them. They have beautiful hearts. They are such caring men. And yet they just haven't realized their magnificence, realized what they've got to give. Because consciously or unconsciously, they're usually a bit afraid to do the work, to sit with other men and be vulnerable. I remember 15 years ago, one of my men's groups in the UK, and one of the guys said, this is the first time, he was 45, first time I've sat with other men where we're not cycling, we're not getting drunk, we're not watching the rugby, And he said it's been the most profound evening because I didn't realize other men wanted to talk about me. Yeah. And it was just a small group, 10 of us. And he said it was transformational because, again, create the safe space. You know this. You know this with your friends who play golf. They just need a safe space to have a deeper conversation. That's my wish because they're beautiful men, and I want them to remember that.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Mhm.
Been a great conversation. So I usually finish off the discussion. I mean, we could talk for hours, to be honest, and I'm sure we will.
Yeah, we
Um,
will.
but I finish off my episodes with 5 quick fire questions. So I'm gonna shoot them at you. So I'm very keen to hear your responses. The first one is, who would you like to say sorry to, given the chance?
Yeah, on the hero's journey, the fundamental relationship between the father and son. Yeah. So the father's deepest desire is forgiveness, and the son's deepest desire is to be seen.
Mm.
And so for me, I've done a lot of work forgiving my father. Yeah.
Mm.
And, in saying sorry or forgiveness is to let go of the judgment, to realize at some level he did the best he could. I didn't accept all his behavior. He left when I was very young. But for releasing him and forgiving myself and forgiving him is such a powerful. Any of the listeners, if you haven't sorted your dad stuff out, send Daniel a message.
What are you proud of being or doing in your life?
Yeah, pride's an interesting word. I'm certainly I'm very fulfilled. I've been together with my wife for 45 years.
Is there? Do
4
you
adult children.
have a little secret there? What would you say is the secret to your relationship success? I think a lot of people, both men and women, to get to 25, 35, 50 years in a relationship with one other person, it is quite a mean feat,
Mm,
to that doesn't come without that's what I call big wave surfing, really,
yeah,
because you're gonna have your ups and downs, but to get through to the other side must be very powerful. So do you have any sort of like little hacks, the little secrets
yeah, yeah.
that you
And
could
that,
share?
and yeah, absolutely. And I think the reason is my wife has just called me forth, for 45 years. And any of the,
You fourth?
yeah, with love, she's gone, I don't want the little boy. Step up, grow up, be the man you can be. Like with love. And it's been tough and challenging, but any of the listeners, any of the women there, at some level, us men are fairly simple. And sometimes we just need a safe space to step into. I'm not saying that's easy, but just to give you a thread of my wife was able to hold that space for me, lovingly challenge me, call me forth. Yeah, stay with me. With that container, I would say the fundamental tools, if there's, 3 steps, I guess. First is you have to unconditionally love yourself.
First
It,
position.
it is
First
not
position.
selfish. Yeah, not
No.
ego
First
self, but
position.
true self.
But
You gotta be.
you gotta be able to look in the mirror and go, "You're fucking amazing."
Yeah, exactly. And whatever work you need to do with a therapist, a men's group, a teacher, learn to love yourself. Let go of that inner critic. Do the emotional intelligence work. Deal with your inner child. All those steps we mentioned. The second is, if you can, have the intention to bring your best self forward every day. Like, is this the best version of myself when I'm in this relationship? I'm not saying you don't have struggles and challenges, but take them to your therapist, take them to your coach. That's not your wife's role. Yeah. But if you can bring your best self there. And then the other thing, my wife and I, all that time, have had a coach, we've had a therapist, we've had support. We were very
Together
young.
or separately?
Together, both. Yeah, but together in particular. What we realized, and again, for the listeners, and it's fascinating in our culture, particularly the British, Australian, Anglo culture. When we were very young, certainly for me, I went, I've never done long-term relationship before. Why wouldn't I get an expert? If I wanted to improve my golf game, I'd get a golf coach. If I wanted to go to the PT, I'd get a PT coach. And at the time, our friends looked at us and go, "You guys must be fucked up. You must have a lot of problems." And we're like, "No, it's like Roger Federer had a coach till the end. It's not about, it may be about problems, but it's about being the best version of yourself." So any of the couples out there, if you want to be the best version of your marriage, stay juicy for 45 years, you got to find a container to do the work, a safe space, whether it's a teacher, a therapist, a rabbi, whatever works for you, because that's, again, in our culture, it's like I say, it's not about always problems. We go regularly just to remind ourselves of what the marriage is about, of how, and at this chapter of my life, I'm 63 this year, my wife's 62. It's like, for the masculine listening, this is the time to be of absolute devotion for the family. Like for me, it's absolute devotion to the goddess. Like that's the worthy pursuit, for me,
Nice. I like that. When did you receive kindness while needing it most and expecting it least?
Powerful question, isn't it? I think for me, it's often in the eyes of a child. It's that, not necessarily my children, but I've often, it's shifted my whole energy, when we live by the beach and there's children and playgrounds and things, and often just a smile or the twinkle or the carefreeness, and in the hero's journey, the hero returns to his child, to his innocence. Yeah, there's a beautiful chapter in The Fisher King, which is there's been a movie made, but it's part of the hero's journey. And the Fisher King was fundamentally wounded, and he could only be healed by Parsifal, who was the fool. And it was the fool, the innocent, the play that healed the king. And so for me, the play and innocence of children it's just kindness in action, I think.
Very sweet. What did your mother or father teach you that you frequently remind yourself of?
I feel consciously or unconsciously, my parents split when I was 7, and my mum had 3 jobs, social housing, and incredible. And I think the hard work, that she put in, and again, mastery. I was talking to someone today who's mastered their craft, and it doesn't have to be negative energy hard work. It's just, if you want to master guitar, I love playing guitar, but I'm not a master. But if you want to master anything, the book 10,000 Hours, all of that. If you want to master marriage, you've got to do the work. Like as a father, you want to look after your children. You kind of. So I think that that's kind of, there's
that discipline.
Not working a bad thing, but working. You've got to lean in. You've got to have the discipline.
Yeah. And finally, what's your superpower?
I would say presence. Consistently, obviously facilitate a lot, do a lot of leadership work, and it's tricky to be relative with yourself, as you know. There's no relativity. And I often get feedback, and I work hard, in my personal practice around embodied presence, which is what I teach. I feel that I can bring a certain presence to a room, to a conversation, to a retreat that creates that safe container for, my clients. And through the feedback, I think it is a bit of a superpower, that I've worked on to master, I guess.
Unreal. Bodhi, thank you. Absolutely love the conversation. And look, I'm going to be bringing you back on at some stage, but we're going to continue our conversations offline. But really appreciate you making the time to come on the show. I think really important work you're doing, and I think a lot to take away for the audience today in terms of, understanding the journey, the process, but also one needs to do to accelerate that and to really, to come into your true masculine. Thank you.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. And in the show notes, the podcast that Richard and I do, one of your other guests, is called True Freedom. So if anyone wants a quick hit and go deeper on some of these topics, it's on all the platforms. And
Beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much, and thank you to the listeners. Hopefully, there's a couple of nuggets there for them to reflect on.
100%. Thank you.
That's it for this episode of Men's Anonymous. Thank you for listening. For more information on the Men's Anonymous podcast, including resources discussed in the show, visit mensanonymous.com. Join us next time as host Daniel Weinberg provides a non-judgmental space for men to voice their innermost feelings and thoughts.